I think that I realized I had a powerful role in the food system as a little kid, actually.
I think I understood I had a powerful role in the food system when I would be working at companies and my kids would want to talk about it.
And one was when I worked in Washington, D.C., and I was in risk analysis for foodborne pathogens.
For me, both personally and professionally, it happened at the same moment in time.
So in 2010, my first book was published. It's called Steak, One Man's Search for the World's Tastiest Piece of Beef. And of course, I expected this book to radically change the world, change the way we think about red meat, how we grow it, how we treat cows, and how we think about beef.
I feel for a number of reasons that this is the moment for me and my company and the history and the evolution of our work to be able to have the greatest impact.
Well, when I first came to Congress, I actually was very involved in healthcare issues back in my home state in the state legislature, and I thought, well, I'll go to Congress and I'll really focus on healthcare. And I got there, and there was a line this long of people who were experts in healthcare, who were already members of Congress. And I went to the Agriculture Committee and I couldn't believe it. There were people who represented the commodity from their state, corn, cotton, peanuts, but there was almost no one talking about the food system.
The first time I realized that I had a powerful role was when I went from being a cook to a chef.
I feel like power comes from three places. It comes from our pocketbook, our votes, and our voice.
I was a child obsessed with cooking and eating, truth be told. And when I was 10 years old, I started to throw dinner parties, and the food was pretty good. I was cooking my way through a Julia Child book, sorry, James Beard. And people came to them. And the fact that if you cooked good food, people came and sat around a table, although I'm not sure at the time I could have articulated it, but I knew that that was a powerful way to use food, that actually it really did bring people to the table, literally and figuratively.
Kids love to talk about food, and if you're with a fun brand, they really like to talk about it. So that was my first inkling.
There was a considerable burden upon the people doing the risk analysis to use scientific information in the most honest and balanced way possible in order to set policy that could potentially lead to safety of the food supply. So that was one place where there's a lot of power, I think, in federal agencies where they have standard setting or policy making for food. And I had a tiny little role to play in one of those risk analyses that they did for foodborne hazards.
But I had one specific approach or ethos about the work that I wanted to do, even from the very beginning, which was I wanted to kind of work and maneuver in between things. I didn't want to be a chef or a restaurant manager. I didn't want to be a farmer or a cook. I didn't want to be an educator or a policy person. I wanted to, and I thought I had the talent to, or at least the guts to, try to navigate in between all of these different sectors, subsectors of food to find some kind of common ground or common voice or common desired destination.
Recently, I was in LA, and I was eating at a new restaurant called Hi Ho, a burger place, a place designed a new burger concept. And they make interesting cheeseburgers that are made from grass-fed Wagyu beef. And as somebody who wrote the book on steak, or a book on steak, I thought, this is incredible. Then I look in the back of the menu, and it has a quote from the Wall Street Journal. And I thought, I wrote that article. Well, then I talked to the founder of Hi Ho. He is one of the founders of Sugarfish Sushi, big restaurant group in LA. And he said he read my article in the Wall Street Journal about steak, where I talked about grass-fed Wagyu, and all these many years later, 5 years later, there's grass-fed Wagyu on the menu at Hi Ho. So I'm not saying I'm the one who's responsible for that, but I thought there is a glimmer of something I did 5 years ago has actually made a difference in the real world. So that was exciting, and it made me think that I'm doing something, getting a little bit of traction here.
What we started to do in our community, and we haven't gotten there yet though, is think about those three places of voice, of vote, right? And of sort of consumer action. And it's like starting to build that case and suddenly starting to reclaim that power by bringing in information, by recruiting people.
We won adoption of the Good Food Purchasing Policy at LA Unified School District in 2012. And the contract, the school district's contract for chicken came up, and Tyson and Pilgrim's Pride were being recommended for a new 5-year contract by the staff at the school district. And so we, at the Food Chain Workers Alliance and our allies didn't believe that these companies could fulfill the standards, could meet the standards in the Good Food Purchasing Policy. And so we had 6 days before the Board of Education was going to vote on these contracts. So we organized, because we had this coalition of organizations from environmental groups to animal welfare to public health to farmers organizations, pulled together, called school board members, sent letters. We had a national call-in day. Students, sent in letters, made phone calls, and we got the vote postponed, not once, not twice. And then that whole request for proposals, that round of bids was just scrapped, and the school district started over again.
And I knew from my experiences at home, running a farm, living in a state like Maine where people are so engaged in what they eat. And, this was 8 years ago, so it's changed a lot. But I realized, this is a topic people really want somebody to engage on and talk about. And I thought, oh, it's my lucky day. I get to be the person who engages on this issue. And having been a farmer, having worked in a state where people are really interested in what's in their food and the quality of their food, and understanding how important this topic was becoming, I just really felt lucky to be in the middle of this conversation.
I was lucky to grow up on what was left of my grandfather's farm, so I knew how to can and pickle and cure and do all these things. I had these skills that to me just seemed like normal everyday skills, like reading, writing, arithmetic, cooking, canning, pickling, and curing, all kind of fit into the same box. But it wasn't until I saw the food as a cook that was coming in the back door that I could actually do something to change it if I became a chef. So when I became a chef, I started going out to try to find farmers who grew food that I would be proud of serving, and they were really, really hard to find. But I was able to use my economic ability to do things like paying farmers in advance to grow things for me so that they would, so that we could have a ripe tomato. There was a lot of power in that. That's the first time I recognized that. And I think I was 21 or 22 years old at the time.
We had this crazy idea to pilot our Chef's Boot Camp for Policy and Change back in the summer of 2012. And we decided to bring 15 chefs to Blackberry Farm and do a 2-day intensive training about policy and advocacy and why we thought their voices were so powerful. And we elected to do that in partnership with the Pew Charitable Trust, who had just launched their campaign around antibiotics overuse in animal production. And we really didn't know what we were getting into. It was kind of like, we're going to test this, we're going to see if the power of chefs is there. And we brought these 15 James Beard Award-winning chefs together and educated them over the course of 2 days about what was happening in antibiotics, about the science, about the risk for superbugs, et cetera. And then talk to them about how to affect change in policy with the FDA, et cetera, how to get their communities engaged. And it was in that moment, as we were leaving that boot camp, when 15 James Beard Award-winning chefs said, okay, well, we're getting on planes tomorrow to go back to our homes, but what can we do? What do we need to do? What's the next step? We're people who get things done. And in that moment, the Pew campaign went from about 40 chefs nationally who were on board in the course of a couple of months to more than 400 chefs nationally that were on board to really push for legislation change. And it was really an effect of those 15 that were in the room that were able to go out and reach their broader communities. And I think in those few months after that first boot camp is when we as an organization, and even me personally, said, you know what, there's really something here. There is tremendous power in this community and in their voices, and we have a responsibility to figure out how they can best use that to create change.